Hello, everyone. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today, we are going to share new Wendigo horror stories. First story. The Wendigo at the Edge of the Lights. The engine stutters as I turn the key, but it dies a few seconds after. Damn it, her engine's cold. It might take a minute to get it running. Frickin' blizzards. I can't wait till winter's over. I say, turning the key more. Well, hurry up, it's freezing. Claire says, zipping up her hoodie. I turn the key 2 more times and Shelley shoots to life. Her lights flicker on and I hear Claire gasp. I look up and see a figure, just standing on the edge of my headlights. I can make out antlers like a deer, but it's on 2 legs. I push my door open and pull out my 9mm loaded with silver bullets, rack the slide, and aim it at the figure, knowing it's what I am hunting. As I do, I hear Claire get out and pull back the hammer of her .38 revolver.
Javier.
I say, pushing the truck release button. Javier wakes up and sees what's going on and starts to open the door, slowly stepping out. That's not a werewolf, Aiden, Claire says with some unease in her voice. Me and Javier start going back to the truck, while not taking our eyes off the creature who is just standing there, watching us. We get to the back and open it up and lift the bottom panel, revealing a bunch of guns, ammo, and other things I've collected over the years. I grabbed the flamethrower I made a few months ago for fun, and recently used to take out some out of Spriggon that was stuck in Minnesota, and put the sling over me, letting it hang. I handed Javier his double barrel, shut the trunk, and walked back to my door, keeping my Beretta aimed as I walked back. We stayed like this for a while. Then the creature started sprinting at us, moving way too fast for a werewolf. I fired 2 rounds, the first hitting the creature in the shoulder, and the second hitting its upper chest, but the creature didn't stop rushing us. Within just a few seconds, the distance was closed, and it pounced on me before I could get another shot off, pushing me into the snow, digging its claws into my shoulders. The creature was inches away from me, its skin on its face seemingly peeled back, revealing a deer skull with teeth, more like a wolf, not deer teeth. Its skin leathery with a coat of dark gray, tangled and matted hair with blood scattered about, some dried and some wet. At this point I knew exactly what this was, a Wendigo. As I was struggling to get the thing off, I saw a bullet collied with the thing's back as Claire's revolver rang out. The Wendigo looked at her and brought its claw up and swung down fast, pushing her over. Javier slides across the hood and fires a shot at the thing but misses, sending buckshot flying over it. The Wendigo shoots its head to Claire, who is still getting up, and jumps onto her, leaving me. I stand up and turn to Javier, who is visibly upset he missed. "Shotty," I shout. He tosses me the gun and I run up and blast a hole into the Wendigo's back, making it really upset. He turns to me and lets out a scream. I brace myself. The Wendigo hits me, sending back into the snow, which helps my fall, but the claws left a nice gash in my chest. I look over and see Javier got his fire axe out of the trunk and was swinging at the Wendigo, who was preoccupied with Claire. He dug the axe into the Wendigo's shoulder, putting a nice cut into it. The Wendigo screams and walks a few feet, then collapses onto the snow-covered road. "Burn it now," Claire says to me, running over to it with Javier. Javier takes his axe out of it and raises it up, then swings back down, hitting its neck and chopping its head off. He bends over and picks up the head by the antlers. "A nice trophy, right, Aiden?" As he shows me, Claire grabs it and starts trying to pull it from his hands. "No, we have to burn it," she says, getting in a tug-of-war battle with a 6 feet 3 inches dude who is jacked and actually almost won. I get up and run over, helping Claire pull the head, and thankfully we got it free. Before we can say anything, she pulls out a pocket knife and cuts the antlers out and shoves them into her pack. "Hey, I want those," Javier says, crossing his arms. She shrugs and gets back into the car. I flick on the Zippo light that is on the end of the flamethrower and begin to torch the body, which lets off an awful smell, but I've smelt worse. Javier hits me right where the Wendigo ripped into my shoulder and says, "Good work, buddy," as he giggles a little knowing that hurt. I smile and shake my head, then run to the trunk to put my flamethrower back and get into the car with Claire. I stick out my fist, and she hesitantly bumps it. "Nice," I say, turning around and putting my seatbelt on. Javier comes around, putting his shotgun up, and closes the trunk, then comes and get in on the passenger side. "We should probably go to the hospital. You're pretty beat up, Aiden," Claire says, eyeing my wounds. "I hate hospital," I say, putting the car into drive. "Aiden," she says, unamused.
Fine.
I push down the gas pedal, and Shelley works her way out of the snow and starts moving towards town, leaving the flaming body behind. Second story. Wendigo encounter. Hi, so this is my first post on Reddit. I just wanted to share this story and see if something like this has ever happened to anyone else. Just to start off with some backstory. My group of friends had started making a nasty habit of joking about the Wendigo. My friend Stacy and me didn't for a while, just due to the fact we believed in the supernatural. But after a few months it grew on us, and not knowing that the Wendigo can actually be triggered by such things, we joined in. Biggest mistake ever. I had just moved into the country, and we enjoyed making trips into town to have a few drinks, which is about a 30-minute walk from my place to town. At night, the first 10 minutes after leaving the bridge that leads out of town is pitch darkness with no streetlights. After that, streetlights are very sparsely places, which can cause for a very creepy walk back without anything happening. So with that all in place, let's continue. Stacy and I begin our night, walking into town, get some beers, and have some fun. Shortly into the night, something slightly strange happens. We receive a phone call from her little sister at home, crying and scared because she saw someone sitting on my friend Stacy's bed. She calms her sister down and asks her cousin to check her room for her sister at home. Everything is fine. No one's in the room. Also, ghosts and weird things happening at her house were very common, so a sighting like this was strangely regular. We continue our night. Into the night, we meet a guy who seems pretty cool. He's riding a bike and tells us he's pretty drunk or something. We decide to hang with him for a bit, wanting to meet people in town. A ways into our hangout, we are sitting on a park bench and the guy is laying on the ground in front of us. Suddenly, my friend stands up and says it's time for us to go. I shrug and agree, and we get going. After getting away from him, she tells me how the guy bit her ankle the day after she had teeth bruises on her ankle. Kind of flustered the guy would do that, we continue our walk out of town. Finally, we pass the bridge, which is our last source of light for the next 10 minutes. We turn on our phone flashlights, and we turn on some music, trying to ease the spooky feeling of being in pitch darkness in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly, we hear a voice beside us. We both jump. It's the same guy on his bike. He asks us if he can follow us until we reach the fork in the road. We need to go left, and he needs to go right. Still slightly creeped out, but almost at the streetlights and the fork in the road, we agree. Regardless, he had to go that way, and so did we. After a bit of walking, we finally reach the fork in the road and the first streetlight. We sigh with relief, hoping he would leave. But he turns down our way instead of going the way he needs to go. Now at this point, we are thoroughly creeped out. We try to ignore it and keep walking, holding our breaths, wanting to reach the next street light, which is some ways away. Finally, after what felt like forever, we reach the next street light, which is also for some reason a small graveyard. I hate my area. Once we reach the street light, the guy stops dead in his tracks and doesn't move any further past it. As we turn around, the guy looks like he has suddenly passed out on his bike, his head down and shoulders slumped. I was about to say something to him, but my friend stopped me and said we really needed to leave him. I agreed, not wanting to be around him much longer either. After a few seconds, I take a peek over my shoulder. He's gone, vanished. The worst part is, even if he had turned around and started pedaling as fast as he could, We still would have been able to see him some ways down the road. I panicked, but also slightly relieved he wasn't there anymore. We continue walking, trying to pretend we aren't creeped out, walking quickly from streetlight to streetlight. Finally, we reach my driveway. My driveway is a long road of darkness. We hadn't put any lights in yet to try and brighten it. We began to walk slowly, holding our breath, some weird feeling of dread coming over me the closer and closer we got to my house and the further into the driveway we entered. I don't know what came over us, but the sudden feeling of you need to run, and you need to run fast, came over us at the same time. We took of bolting at the exact same time without having to say a word to each other. We got to my front door. I unlocked it quicker than I ever have before. We get inside. Just as I'm about to close the door, this hellish scream or growl, whatever the sound is, come out of nowhere. I could hear it getting close to the door and steps. I slammed the door closed and locked it and dropping to the ground in fear. We both sat there holding our breaths, scared to even breathe. Fast forward a couple weeks, me and my Stacy had forgotten about what happened. Suddenly it came up in convo, and we tried to find the sound we heard. Nothing worked. We looked up every possible animal, even animals that weren't likely. We spent an hour on this, until we decided to look up the sound of a Wendigo. It was the only sound that fit perfectly. We don't joke or talk about it now. I hate to. Even writing this post made me feel scared to bring it up. Once again, this is my first post ever, so be gentle on me. Shocked. I just really curious to hear if anyone had something like that happen to them. I also posted the link below of the sound we heard. The sound is on the very first clip. Also, I apologize for the length of this. Third story. I own a ranch out in the middle of nowhere. Something strange has been eating my cows. It all started with a phone call. I picked up on the third ring. Jesse, Paul started, his voice cutting through the silence of the night and waking me from the deepest sleep I'd had in a while. I just checked on your cows, and a couple of them slipped through a break in the fence. Rubbing a hand over my face, I blew out a frustrated sigh and peeked at the clock on my dresser. The red numbers glared back at me tauntingly. 11:32. Despite being absolutely exhausted, I knew my farmhand couldn't handle it all on his own, and these cows were my bread and butter. If I lost any more, I'd be madder than a hornet's nest. Jesse? Paul questioned. You fall asleep on me, brother? I shook my head, more to convince myself than him, sat up in bed and threw off the covers. I heard you. Just real tired is all. But I'm up. A crackle settled over the phone before I heard Paul clear his throat and say, Yeah, they've gone over yonder to the tree line. I'm sure we can get 'em rounded up, though, and we'll get you back to bed here soon. With a tug, I yanked on my boots and laced them up. Thanks, brother. I appreciate your help. Just let me get my bearings and I'll be there in 2 shakes. See you in a bit, he said, the phone disconnecting. Honestly, now that I thought about it, the fact that Paul was even out this late was strange in and of itself. I didn't know what he was doing out in the pasture at this time of the night, but I did know it wasn't safe. For the past couple of weeks, cows had gone missing right and left, and I'd felt increasingly helpless. Something had to give, and it wasn't going to be me. Whatever or whoever was doing this was going to pay for the chaos they had caused one way or another, because there wasn't any way I was just going to roll over and let it happen. With a glance in the mirror, I ran a hand through my hair, blew out a breath, and switched on my lamp. I threw on an old flannel and headed downstairs just in time to be caught by my little sister. Jessie, what are you doing up so late? She asked, her big brown eyes peering up at me from the living room couch. You know, I started, a small grin tugging at my lips. I should be asking you the exact same thing, young lady. With a huff, She held her nose in the air and looked down at me, a bowl of Captain Crunch in her hands. 16-year-olds don't need a bedtime. She paused and then pointed towards her bowl. And besides, I was famished. You can't cook worth a crap. Famished, I muttered, the word floating from my mouth on a sarcastic breath. I don't know why in the world you go around using words like famished, but my squirrel and dumplings beat a bowl of Captain Crunch any day. I quipped, my hand coming down to ruffle her hair. She scrunched up her nose, set down her bowl, and rolled her eyes before saying, "You and I both know that's a lie." Suddenly noticing that I had my shoes on, she quirked a curious brow and said, "Where you headed this late at night?" Booted feet trudging over to the door. I winced when I heard the floorboard squeak. I really needed to replace that. I'm headed out to the pasture. Couple of the cows got loose and Paul needs help rounding them up. I should be back before sunrise. Just make sure, Dash. I'll come help too, she retorted, already racing over to her room to track down her own boots. Ava, I shouted from the living room. Don't worry about it. I'm sure tween Paul and I will do just fine. Despite my qualms, I watched as she came clomping out of her room, feet shoved into worn, weathered boots, and her braids loose, baby hairs sticking out in every direction. With a shake of my head, I chuckled at her stubbornness, realizing this was just one battle that wasn't worth fighting. Stepping out into the cool night air, I waved her onward, unlocking my old pickup truck and shoving my key into the ignition. Ava plopped down on the seat next to me, her hands picking at a scab on her elbow. The old truck choked a couple of times before finally sputtering to life, and then we were speeding down the old dirt road, dust kicking up into the air in thin, brown puffs. When we finally made it to the ranch, though, Paul wasn't anywhere in sight. Only having a landline had its advantages and its disadvantages, and right now it was the latter. Maybe he had run back home to his old lady. She was as big as she was round. Her belly stretched out clear in front of her like an overly ripe watermelon. This was going to be their first child, and she was due any day now. Paul, of course, was increasingly paranoid that something would happen to her, or she would need something when he wasn't around, so he never strayed too far from her side. Although I haven't ever married and had kids of my own, my worry was somewhat similar when Ava was out of my sight for too long. So I couldn't blame the man for running off if that was the issue. Shoving the thought aside, I made a mental note to call him about it later. "Jesse," Ava called, her voice cutting through the still of the night. She had already hopped out of the car and was halfway across the cow pasture, standing right smack dab in the middle of it. "Ava, it's darker than sin out here. I need you to stay close to me. There's no telling what's lurking out in these parts at this time of night." "Oh, come on," she yelled back. "Don't be a baby." Even in the dark, I could sense her sass, her tongue sticking out at me rebelliously as I fought a losing battle to not step on the countless cow patties littering the pasture. Somehow in my sleep-deprived state, I'd grabbed my nice boots instead of my mud-crusted ones, caked in who knows what else. "Ava, I'm serious," I warned. "I already have to look for these cows, and the last thing I need to be looking for is you." I paused, my voice stern, but softened a little around the edges. "Listen, you came here to help, not hinder, you hear?" An exasperated sigh left her lips before she finally relented and shrugged her shoulders. "Fine, I'll stay close." I patted her shoulder and pointed towards the few heifers that were grazing along the tree line. "Listen, the faster we work together to get this done, the faster you can be back at home eating your Captain Crunch." Strolling across the field with me, her steps fell in line with my own, 3 of hers for every one of mine. "It'll be soggy by then," she quipped. I punched her lightly on the shoulder, shooting her a grin. I'll make it up to you by taking you by the Waffle House in town. Her eyes suddenly lit up at the offer before she grabbed my arm and practically dragged me along. Deal, she said, a smile spreading across her features. A couple hours later, and we both quickly realized that gathering the cows and mending the fence took a whole lot longer than we'd anticipated. Wiping some sweat from her brow, Ava suddenly glanced over towards me and then back around at our surroundings before saying, "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" I asked. "The cows mooing?" I nudged her shoulder playfully, then spoke up again. "Yeah, that's kinda what they do." She punched me in the side, narrowing her eyes and said, "No, stupid. It sounds like a lady or something. Like she's talking to someone." My eyes met hers, my face contorting into one of silent skepticism. "Ava, I don't hear a darn thing besides the wind blowing through the trees and those cows mooing way over yonder. Now, help me pack up my toolbox so we can get the heck out of Dodge before you scare yourself even more." With a huff, she helped me load everything back into the toolbox before she stopped again. I eyed her, stopping what I was doing and folding my arms over my chest. "What is it this time?" I questioned, my brows raised expectantly. "There's no way you didn't hear that," she exclaimed, her movements animated as her hands flew up to express her concern. This time it sounded real deep and gruff, kinda like a man was talking. I brushed it off, pressing the toolbox closed and picking it up before turning to her and saying, "I think your imagination is just going a little haywire." Peeking a glance at my watch, I internally cringed when I noticed that it was about 2 o'clock. As I took a couple steps across the pasture, though, I noticed that suddenly the night noises came to a standstill. I stopped in my tracks, looking over at Ava, and noticed her do the same. This time, I felt a strange tension in the air. The pasture's normal harmony of moos was suddenly quiet. The crickets from before had even died down, their music fading into an odd silence. It became very apparent that we were all alone, and something about that felt terribly uncomfortable. By the time we had mended the fence, the cows had wandered far across the field, deciding to hunker down under some trees for the night. Fog crept over the lush grass, coating the pasture in an almost ethereal haze. Something about it was eerie, and it made me just uneasy enough to kick myself for forgetting to grab my gun off of my nightstand. "Jesse," Ava whispered, breaking me from my silent observation, her voice slightly wavering. I turned on my heel to face her, my eyes taking in her worried expression, her own eyes as wide as saucers. "Ava, what's dash?" "Over there." She pointed, cutting me off, her fingers shaking like a leaf. Following her trajectory, I stilled. Every hair on my arm stood on end when my eyes connected with two more near the tree-line. Ava looked like a deer caught in the headlights, her own arms sprinkled in goosebumps. The eyes glowed hauntingly, a sinister smirk fixing itself to the creature's face, a smile way too wide to be human, except for the fact that it appeared as if in some strange way it was. Despite this thing being shrouded in darkness, there was no mistaking the outline of a human-like form. I wrapped my hand around Ava's arm fast as lightning and began to hurry the both of us out of the field. "Ava," I whispered, "you've got to move faster. Come on, you've got to help me." My legs made quick strides across the pasture, but Ava was still struggling to keep up. I made a quick decision, grabbing her up and throwing her over my shoulder before jogging towards the truck. I threw the both of us inside, quickly locking the doors and peering out across the pasture, expecting to see those glowing eyes still fixed on the two of us. Except, there was nothing. Still shaken up, I shoved my key into the ignition of my old diesel truck, hoping and praying it wouldn't give me any trouble this time. A shiver raced down my spine as time crawled by. Distressed, I waited for the orange glow on my instrument panel to fade, mirroring the unsettling memory of that creature's eyes, the way they gleamed from the depths of the woods, only proving to add to my ever-growing anxiety. When the engine roared to life, though, there was no relief. The turbo barely had a chance to awaken before I got the heck out of Dodge, barreling down the road, a spewing plume of rolling coal left in our wake, a frantic attempt to outpace the lurking fear behind me. What was that? Ava suddenly asked, her knees huddled up to her chest as her arms wrapped securely around them. With a quick scan of my surroundings, I looked in the rearview mirror and exhaled a sigh of relief when there was nothing but the trees and a cloud of dirt behind us. I honestly have no idea what that thing was, but I do know that I'm going to call Paul as soon as we get back to the house and get this all straightened out. My voice shook slightly, but I tried to mask it, clearing my throat and gripping the steering wheel instead. The last thing I wanted was for Ava to know that I was scared out of my doggone mind. "Jesse," she said, her voice soft and quiet, hands picking at a loose string on her jeans. "It's okay to be scared." I knew she was only trying to comfort me, but one of us had to be strong, so I shook off my fear as best I could and reached out a hand to pat her knee. "I'm not scared," I replied, my voice smooth and even. "I'm just worried." The second we pulled up to the house, though, that worry slowly morphed back into fear. Something familiar was lying on the front porch. Slamming the truck into park, I hopped out and ran up to it. There, splayed out across the wood, was a bloodied mass. A cow. I held back a gasp, trying and failing to steady my stomach as it bubbled and churned. Instead, I bent over and dry heaved, the smell infiltrating everything around me. Blood and guts squirmed and writhed with millions of maggots, the badly slaughtered heifer laying there with her black, glossy eyes staring up at the ceiling, tongue dangling from her mouth. Large lacerations covered her body, monstrous chunks missing from the abdominal area. It took all I had not to vomit. The sound of the truck door rang out as Ava closed it, and before I could stop her, her feet were padding across the grass to stand beside me. I heard her gasp before she quickly reached towards her shirt, tugging it up over her nose to mask the horribly wretched smell. Covering my own nose with the sleeve of my flannel, I motioned for Ava to follow me inside. I needed to inspect the cabin, but I also wanted to keep her close. Together, the both of us carefully moved throughout each room until we were satisfied that we were safe. Once we both gave the okay, we plopped down on the couch and just stared at each other. Neither of us mentioned the cow still laying outside on the front porch, but I was certain that somehow we both knew how it got there. Exhaustion clung to us like a wet t-shirt, but it was apparent that the adrenaline coursing through our systems had us both working in overdrive. And that's when I heard it. The landline in the kitchen. "It's gotta be Paul." I stood from the couch and hurried over to the phone, nearly tripping over my own feet as I answered it on the first ring. "Paul?" I questioned, my voice a bit too loud, a bit too unrestrained, and a whole lot of worried. "Where the heck were you, man?" Suddenly the line crackled and a voice came back over the speaker. "Jesse Pauls." There was a pause, but the slight edge that the voice had was unmistakable. "Missy? Is that you? Where's Paul?" "Pauls?" Her voice wavered again before I heard the phone being snatched from her hand and another voice floated over the line, the tone both sinister and calm. "I'm sorry, Jesse," it crooned, its voice deep and smooth. "Paul's not here right now. In fact, Paul was just getting in the way, so I simply had to." The voice trailed off, the line crackling again. Fear coursed through me, and I couldn't help but break out into a cold sweat, the realization finally dawning on me. This was the creature. Instead of following us home, it had run back to Paul's house. But why? You Dash, my voice shook. You didn't kill Dash. Oh, but I did, the creature hissed. I could almost feel its grin widening at my unbridled disbelief. You see, it started. I'll say it in a way that your poor human mind can comprehend. Missy here's got a bun in the oven, the creature drew out. And then he suddenly went quiet, giving me a second to let it all sink in. And when it finally did, I paled and nearly dropped the phone when it responded. And it doesn't belong to Paul. Fourth story. Chased by a Wendigo. It was a dark night. I was outside walking to another part of my campus. Suddenly I had this overwhelming feeling of being followed. It was winter, and also the sun was down at 5 p.m. This was a perfect setting for a horror movie. Anyway, I was walking when suddenly I felt the presence again. This time it got closer to me. What happened next still gives me chills. I was being chased at this point by this shadowy figure. It was about 8 feet tall, and I sensed it had glowing red eyes. I didn't see its face, however. I could sense it was really huge. How did I manage to get out of this one? Let's just say I ran faster than I've ever ran in my life. When I looked back, all I could see is this black arm trying to swing at me as I reached the door. I've never been so scared in my life. The fact that happened twice didn't help. That's it, folks. This was my small Wendigo encounter experience. Fifth story. I believe I had a close encounter with something strange in Mendocino National Forest. This has left me feeling extremely shook, and I'd love some opinions, especially from someone with experience. Last year, I had a very strange experience in a national forest out in California. I was by myself, on a road trip with my dog, and I was driving pretty far into Mendocino National Forest. I like to camp in national parks/forests because it's isolated so my dog can roam, and they're free of charge. A trade-off for sketchy/rough drives into the parks sometimes and lack of service/assistance. Anyway, I was driving up this dirt road, kind of curling up a mountain around maybe 5 p.m. It was very nice out, sunny and warm with a slight breeze. Nothing serious happened, but I felt extremely uncomfortable driving into the area, and that feeling did not let up. Driving up the mountain, I felt like I shouldn't stay there, and I even texted my boyfriend about it for as long as I could before my phone completely lost service. I was looking for a sign of another person having been around the area lately, but didn't see anything. I pulled over and got out of my car with my dog to look over the edge and noticed a dead squirrel and some broken glass mixed in with the dirt and gravel road. Yuka, my dog, starts to growl slightly. She is vocal, but I've almost only ever seen or heard her growl at or with other dogs. I did see her growl at a possum once, so it could be something she smelled maybe. This place continued to make me feel quite on edge, but I pride myself in being an independent traveler and backpacker, so I decided to continue at least a bit further with my grumbling pup to see if I could find a good place to camp. I continue to notice more dead animals. Keep in mind no one is going to be going more than 5 to 10 miles per hour up this thing, and that's if there's anyone even there.
I hear men's voices.
They sound close, and I think I should call out to them, so I stop my car, but then kind of freeze up and feel like I shouldn't. I can't really make out what they're saying. I don't see any sign of people anywhere, and I get back in my car and continue to slowly drive forward and cautiously look for where the voices could be coming from. I've never ran into other people in a national park or forest when I've gone this deep in. The unsettling feeling grows about the voices, which have sort of come and gone a few times, and I give up and begin to turn my car around. I honestly don't remember how Yuka was acting on the way down. I was scared and focused on getting out of there. I just distinctly remember being surprised at her grumbling when we were standing outside of my car. Kind of dangerously quickly, I went back down the mountain, not seeing any sign of anyone. I decided to spring for luxury and get a hotel for the night. I figured I was just fine. Huge and open spaces can be intimidating, I told myself, and the voices could have been echoing from somewhere far off, and they just sounded close. Animals die. Glass gets broken. Nothing happened. Cool. But I remember this place. It sticks with me. Whenever I'm watching scary movies, if I'm walking my dog in the woods at night, nothing compares to the feeling I had driving up that mountain, and it's honestly kind of interesting to me as well as frightening. I recently happened across some information as well as some Native American lore that made me feel extremely uneasy. Fast forward a year. I've mentioned this place to a few people and the haunting vibes it gave me, but nothing much more. Googled the national park once and didn't see anything, but didn't look much either. I like scary movies and things of that nature, hence my fascination in this little event, lol. So my boyfriend and I were coming up on finishing our road trip just yesterday. We were in Wyoming for a wedding. There were only 2 to 3 hours left, and the sun had set, so we decided to listen to some scary podcasts and YouTube videos. We went from the No Sleep podcast to the X-Files and ended up on a True Stories video dealing with Native American lore. I'm half paying attention, petting my dog, playing Pokemon on an emulator, and I hear the narrator mention Wendigos. Very briefly says what they are, and casually mentions they can mimic voices. I mean it when I say the most horrible chills I have ever had in my life crawl down my spine, and I stare at my boyfriend and ask him if he remembers that national forest I was freaked out about last year. He says he does, and he reminds me that he texted me I was probably close to a Wendigo. He did. I remember him saying that, but didn't know much about their lore and thought he was just being funny, like, yeah, Bigfoot is probably stalking you, or some other dad joke. And he was like, no. I mean, I was mostly joking, but I said it specifically because you said you were hearing voices that you couldn't find a trace of. I feel strange AF, and I start Googling Wendigos, etc., etc. They are allegedly able to mimic human voices, and they would live in that sort of area. It all matched up. Obviously, there's a ton of questionable info out there, but I tried to find more reputable websites and authentic experiences. I then specifically looked up missing persons in the area, and the first headline that catches my eye is, "Another family goes missing in Mendocino." And I went through different websites and news articles of people going missing, but they are all a little hidden underneath national park websites and pictures of trees. I remembered looking up the forest about a year ago and didn't see anything, and realized these stories didn't seem to be talked about much, which also piqued my intuition. It was stated that well over 100 people in the past 8 years have gone missing and not been found, on top of many which are found dead. It just has my intuition super spiked. Remembering how unsafe I felt and how much I wanted to get out of there terrifies me, and I felt so uneasy about what I was hearing. And due to this day, my dog and I are very close. She was a stray that started following me one day, and I ended up bringing home from Costa Rica. So her little growls along the way makes me feel like there was something wrong. Even though it was just a storytelling video, those stories originate from somewhere. I have done a lot of solo traveling both in and out of the country, and I have never had such a bad feeling. On top of seeing an unnecessary amount of dead animals in a national forest, which just seemed strange. I don't think I'll be doing more solo traveling unless it's around civilization, lol. Does anyone know about authentic Native American lore, or has anyone else had a kind of inexplicable experience like this? Extra points if you've had bad vibes in Mendocino National Forest from a Wendigo. 6th story. A group of friends encountered a Wendigo. So a few years ago, me and a group of 5 other friends were hiking near the Idaho border, and 2 days into a 4-day hike, we started to notice what felt like something had died, but figured since we were in the middle of nowhere, it was just a kill from some kind of predator. We ignore it and keep hiking, and close to when we plan to set up camp a few hours later, myself and another buddy are ahead of the group looking for a decent area to set up camp for the night, since this was a new area to us, and I noticed antlers and think asterisk, oh cool, that's a good size buck. And I'll to mark this area for hunting season asterisk. But then that smell from earlier hits us again, and this time it's so bad we are gagging. So we choose to keep going to avoid the smell, and I notice the antlers, but they are too high for a deer's head, and we get this feeling of just pure dread. So I rack a shell into the chamber of the shotgun I had, and I see this thing look out from behind the tree, and holding onto it with its hands, I put 2 1-ounce slugs into this thing, and my other buddy puts a few rounds from his rifle into it, and we know we hit the thing, and we start backing away. And that's when it screeches at us. So that point, we take off running, and we hear it chasing us for a while, but then it just stopped. But we kept running until we felt safe again, and we left that area and refused to return to this day. 7th story. Wendigo. I love the woods. I love mountains. Being able to live so close to nature is a privilege I've never taken for granted. But recently, something strange happened out there that I'd like to share. I was heading down a path in the woods, not far from my home. It had been snowing heavily for the past couple weeks and was finally starting to calm down. In the distance, I noticed what appeared to be a man, leaning against a log, far from the trail. He was still. I feared maybe he had been stuck out here and frozen in that spot. It's all too common out here when the snowfall is heavy. I made my way over to him. As I got close, I could see his ears and fingers were frostbitten. His clothes were dirty and disheveled. His mouth was covered in dried blood. When I was only a few steps from him, his head began to move, slowly turning and looking at me with dead, glazed-over eyes. His expression was vacant until he looked at me with surprise and a crazed sort of fear. He tried to stumble to his feet, but instead ended up flailing into the deep snow. I talked softly and slowly. Do you need help? How long have you been out here? The man wouldn't, or perhaps couldn't, speak. However, nearby was a small hiking backpack with a tag on it that listed an address. I knew where the address was, just a few miles from my home. He must be a neighbor. I tried asking him if that was where he lived. He just kept looking at me with that crazed, fear-drenched stare, but eventually he was able to nod in affirmation. I had no way of contacting anyone, so I figured my best option would be to take him myself. Who knew how much longer he'd last out there if I left to get help? I picked him up to stand on his feet, and he was remarkably light. He leaned on my shoulder at first, but after walking for a short time, he walked almost entirely on his own. He began to say things, as if he was talking to himself, a low, dry, gurgling sort of speech. It felt very inhuman. He must be delusional, I thought. I tried to get him to talk to me. How long have you been out here? Weeks. His voice was like gravel. I'm taking you home. Is there someone that can help you? My wife. You were out here all alone? He stopped talking. After a short time, he stopped walking and fell to his knees. He began to weep, and I tried to stand him up again. He latched onto me and whispered closely, I had to eat. That explained the dried blood on his mouth. When you're in a life or death situation, you have to make hard decisions. I stopped talking after that. It took us a while of trudging to make it to his home. As we approached the front door, it swung open and out ran a woman whom I assumed was his wife. Oh my God. Honey, is that you? She shouted as she ran up and grabbed him, all but ignoring me. She hurried him inside, saying she'd call for a doctor, leaving me in the cold. That's fine. It's probably a lot to take in, to have your husband disappear for weeks and show up out of the blue like that. I had to get home to my wife anyway. She's probably wondering where I was. On my way home, I was going over everything that had happened. What if I hadn't found him? Will he tell his wife what happened? Where was the other person that was with him? Next thing I remember, I was doubling over in pain. It came from the bottom of my stomach. Oh no, I thought. I could have just infected myself with something he had. I blacked out and woke up at home in bed. No idea how I got there. An hour or so went by. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling a pit in my stomach. The pain was immense. It was almost like a severe hunger. I thought for sure I had contracted something from the man I helped earlier, some airborne illness. When the doctor came, he approached my bedside with caution. He had almost no professional candor. His eyes widened as he looked at me with a certain fear. He only did a few tests and left me to be quarantined in my room alone. I could hear him speaking to my wife in the kitchen. When he goes. I couldn't make out much of the conversation. Seemed like bad news. After the doctor left, my pain only got worse. It was more distinctive hunger, however. I was becoming delirious. I couldn't remember the last time I ate. I have eaten before, haven't I? My wife came to me asking what I needed. My only answer was, meat. It's been a week now since I got sick. I've lost so much weight. I'm a ghost of my former self. But I eat constantly. Venison and beef, most commonly. My hunger is so strong I'll eat them raw. When I was at my weakest, my wife fed me, and I almost bit her fingers off a few times. Not that I mean to. I'm just starving. She's opted to start sliding food under my door. She says I'm not the same anymore. I know that much. The dog went missing and only I know why. The doctor has come a few times again, saying the same things to my wife. However, I don't think he's saying, when he goes, it's something more like Wendigo. A Wendigo is a demon. They'll take over your body and slowly kill you. They say Wendigos do awful things to you, killing people and consuming their flesh. Soon I'll die. I can feel it. Whatever has happened to me will be the end of this body. Then I'll have to go. But what can I say? At least you got this far. I helped you out of there. You never would have survived without me. I just needed this body. It's been such a long time. Out there in the woods. I love the woods. I love the mountains. 8th story. Wendigo. When I was in my first year of college, I lived with my mom by ourselves. My dad had passed the year before, and we moved out of the house shortly after. I was glad because I had suffered a lot of paranormal trauma growing up there, and was glad to get out. One night I was driving home on Highway 111 North after youth group, and I saw something that still bewilders me. It was lightly raining that night. Mist crawled across the road from the cow fields on either side. The lights from the few gas stations nearby were reflected in the wet asphalt. I was driving about 3 car lengths behind a dark minivan with nobody else in sight on the roads. All of a sudden, I saw the van swerve to miss something in the middle of the road. I was going too fast, and the road was too slick to miss it. All of a sudden I saw, framed in my headlights and silhouetted in the glowing red brake lights of the van speeding away, a tall, muscular man with the upper shoulders and head of a buck. It was like a minotaur, but a deer head instead of a bull and glowing red eyes. I clenched and braced for impact, and then passed right through the figure. It was like it dissolved right into the mist. I am used to swerving to miss deer at night, but I should have nailed this thing on the driver's side. Nothing. I was too afraid to look in the rear-view mirror as I gassed it and sped home. I was only a couple of miles away, which was both comforting and terrifying at the same time. I raced in the door and locked it behind me. I told my mom, who laughed it off, but was disconcerted at my pale, clammy complexion. I only later found in research of being described like what I saw. The Wendigo. a Native American legend that was terrifying to me as a child, but I had never heard it described like this. I had never heard of any creature like this until that night on a dark highway, 111, that I will never forget. Ninth story. Possible Wendigo encounter in southern Ontario. Hi everyone. Had a very strange encounter in my woods today and thought I'd share and get some opinions. For some background, I live in a small town between Toronto and Ottawa on traditional Anishinaabe lands. I usually walk my dog every day, sometimes multiple times a day, all throughout my woods. I decided to take my dog out for a walk this afternoon and not put my headphones in. I usually do because, as I stated, I walk out there every day. As we were walking, I heard a voice call my name in almost a sing-song voice. Naturally, I stopped and looked around. I called for my dog to come to me, and he stopped where he was and stared at me for a while, and then eventually came to me. I did not call out to the voice or acknowledge it. I walked around a little more and still didn't see anything. Just for some context, I live with my parents and my mom knows I am totally freaked out about skinwalkers. I had a bonfire a few nights ago, and she hid and was calling out trying to freak me out. I figured since she knew I was by myself, she was trying to freak me out, and it did sound similar to her voice. As I continued walking and looking, I heard, "Come over here." As soon as I heard it, I was instantly freaked out because not only did this sound further away than when my name was called, I know that the myth goes when they sound close, they're far away and vice versa, but it also sounded like my own voice saying it. I also heard this call out much more clearly than when my name was called. Anyways, I didn't acknowledge the voice, and making sure my dog was with me, I got the hell out of there. When I got to the house, no one had been outside and no one had called for me. My family has lived on this property for generations, and we live outside of a very small town. I have no neighbors that would be close enough for me to hear them that clearly. I have no idea what was out there this afternoon, but I can tell you for certain I will never walk out there with my headphones on again. I also feel like it's worth mentioning that my sister has been whistling out there to freak me out, and I know that supposedly attracts them. I did also smoke shortly before walking, but I've been smoking daily for years, and I've never suffered from auditory hallucinations or heard any sort of voices while high. I've never posted on here before, but if I have any other experiences, I'll be sure to post them. Can honestly say that was the weirdest experience of my life. 10th story. I had an encounter with a Wendigo in northern Idaho. This was a few years ago, and I haven't done much research on it until recently. My family and I had gone up to my grandparents' house. They had 10 acres of land and only used about 1 to 1.5 acres for the house and yard. They had a large, dense, pine forest area all around their house. Except for the road to it, there was forest for miles around. They had cut down some trees to make four-wheeler paths that we could ride on when we went up there. One day my sister and I were riding out on the paths on some of my grandparents' four-wheelers. For whatever reason, I think it was to get a drink, but I don't entirely remember. My sister went inside. I thought nothing of it and kept riding the four-wheeler I was on. Well, about 3 minutes later, I was driving past a really dense patch of the forest. Over the four-wheeler engine, I heard a loud growl. I heard it clearly to my left in the patch of forest. Thinking it was just a coyote, I looked over towards where I heard the growl. I did not see a coyote. You know that feeling when you look into a forest at night and you get scared something will stare back at you? Well, this happened to me in the middle of the day. What I was looking at still haunts me to this day. I was staring into two large, yellow eyes. It appeared that they were sunken into the creature's face. The eyes were probably about 1.75 times the size of a normal human eye, and they were watching me. I could see by looking at the eyes alone that this was a smart creature. I didn't get to see what it was because it was standing in a bush. This bush was very large, like probably about 10 feet tall. About 8 feet up this bush, is where I saw these eyes. I couldn't see any other part of this creature, but I didn't stick around to find out what it was. I put the four-wheeler into drive and sped up to about 55 to 60 miles per hour. I ran inside and did not go back out on the paths for the rest of the trip. No one else in my family saw anything, but I was terrified of whatever it was. Fast forward 6 years, and it is this year. I was talking with my friend about spooky things we had seen. I told him about this story and began to wonder what I could possibly have seen. I did a lot of research on what large predatory animals live up there. It is northern Idaho if you don't believe me and want to go check. After doing a little bit of digging, I found that no animals that were 8 feet tall. I didn't believe it because I was skeptical of anything that was paranormal. I checked again and again because I didn't want to believe it was something that no one had ever captured or been able to prove existed. The largest wolf ever found would have only been 6 feet tall when standing on its hind legs. The largest bear might have been large enough, but it could not have fit in that bush. So I began to research any possible creature that it could have been. Eventually I found one. A Wendigo. It was the only possible creature I could have seen. I don't know why it didn't attack me, or why it let me get away. Based off the features I saw, the large, yellow, sunken eyes, it could have only been a Wendigo. What scared me even more is that a couple years later my grandparents moved out of that house for an unknown reason. They say it was to be closer to the family, but the family was fine making a long drive and coming up very often. They moved only a little bit closer. It is still a long drive.